I want to welcome everyone to SMA Awareness Month and TreatSMA, and we're very lucky today to have Dan O'Connell, one of the medical assessors at the Medicine and Health Product Regulatory Authority, MHRA, and he's in the musculoskeletal oncology division, looking at obviously treatments that affect many of our families and individuals within TreatSMA. And so we're very fortunate that Dan's agreed to join us today. And to sort of not use up any of his time, if you're okay to share your slides, Dan, please present.
So hopefully you'll be seeing my slides shortly. Can you see my slides, Joseph?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. So it's a real pleasure to kick off. Thank you very much for the invitation. So as Joseph said, my name is Dan O'Connell and I work at the UK Regulatory Authority in the UK. And I'm going to present a few slides. I've actually got quite a few, so hopefully that doesn't scare you off and you decide to go out and sit in the garden. So, but I'm just going to go through them as a top level, and hopefully that they'll be a useful resource, so they can be shared. But really, it's to provide an overview of some of the work that we do in medicines regulation, and also to really pinpoint some areas that you might be interested in, particularly along orphan drugs and early access. So the next slide just illustrates some of the areas where medicines regulation or drug regulation covers. And actually, through the development of a new drug, there are a number of approvals throughout the whole process. So this might include clinical trial approvals. So when you've got a new medicine coming through from early stage through to late stage discovery. We give scientific advice. Medicines that are approved or have a license, they have monitoring called pharmacovigilance, where the safety is monitored. There's inspection, there's monitoring of adverse events and advertising. There's many different areas that the regulatory authorities are involved with. There's always a bit of a confusion about MHRA, so the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Products Agency. And it's formed really from two different organizations over a decade and a half ago. An organization that was involved in regulation of medical devices and the Medicines Control Agency. And essentially we have three different centers. One is called the MHRA, which is the main regulatory body. There's NIBS, which is the National Institute for Biological Standards and Controls. And this is a world leader in looking at standards for biological medicines. And then the CPRD, which is the Clinical Practice Research Data Link. This is an organization that can help capture real world data and use real world data to assist in evidence generation. We often confuse with NICE, and NICE is the HTA body, so the Health Technology Appraisal Body in the UK. But we do work very closely with NICE along different parts of the drug approval process. This next slide just provides an overview of the MHRA Regulatory Centre. So we are one of the largest regulatory authorities in Europe. We moved into new offices in Canary Wharf, one of the first government hubs for civil service with over 5,000 civil servants. So, excuse me, we're only between sort of 800 and 900, but it's a large building and we take up quite a substantial space there. Within the agency, we are structured within divisions depending on what our remit is. So I work in a division called Licensing Division, which is responsible for approving marketing authorization applications. So those are the drug licensing applications, but also clinical trials. We have a division called the Vigilance and Risk Management of Medicine, which is responsible for ensuring the safety of medicines. an inspectorate division who are ensuring compliance against the standards, particularly for manufacturing and good clinical practice, and a devices division which is there to ensure the safety, quality and performance of devices. So up until January of this year, the UK was a partner within the European system, but we're now in the transition component to Brexit. But we're still involved with the EU regulatory framework until January of 2021. This slide just provides an overview of the EU regulatory framework. Member states have one or more competent authorities. So the UK competent authority is the MHRA. Other competent authorities are such as BfArM in Germany, NEB in the Netherlands. So there's a number that at least one per member state. The European Medicines Agency is an agency of the EU, and it actually coordinates through a number of scientific committees which are made up of members from the different member states, the evaluation of new medicines under a procedure called the centralized procedure. And all orphan drugs, so drugs that are designated in rare diseases, have to go through the centralized procedure. So member states and the European Medicines Agency, we work together, and our framework of working together is shaped by what are called regulations, directives, and guidelines. There's a number of opportunities for interaction in other aspects, such as scientific advice. So orphan drugs. In 2000, so the orphan drug regulation has been around for over 20 years, a new regulation was put into force to support the development of medicines for rare diseases. This was because it was recognized that patients suffering with rare conditions should be entitled to the same quality of treatment as other patients. And often because of the small numbers of patients, the pharmaceutical industry is often unwilling to develop these medicines without the normal market conditions. And an orphan drug, so the term orphan drug, is one that has been developed to treat one of these rare conditions and fits the criteria of an orphan designation. And it's free to apply for orphan designation through the European Medicines Agency. This slide just illustrates the traffic that goes through the orphan committee called the COMP, which is the Committee for Orphan Medicinal Products. It's recognized that although rare diseases affect in small numbers per condition, actually globally, they may affect between 350 million and 400 million people. The number of designations are growing, as you can see from this curve, and I just draw your attention to the blue line here, which is the total number of designations that are coming through to COMP. You'll see these two peaks here in terms of the designation, and that actually reflects some Horizon 2020 funding that European Commission put forward during that particular period of time. So there's about 1,800 designations spread over 450 separate conditions, and there are a number of designations in SMA. But as you can see, if the estimate is between 5,000 and 8,000 rare diseases, and there's only designations for 450 separate conditions so far, there's still a long way to go. Just move to the paediatric regulation. So there's a paediatric regulation that was brought into force more recently in 2007. It's estimated that 50 to 90% of medicines generally used in children have not been formally assessed for the use for the paediatric population. This may include evidence of effectiveness, a lack of appropriate dose, monitoring of particular side effects, particularly for children that are going through growth or maturity, and the need for different formulations for a variety of strengths. Often information is missing or absent for the paediatric population, and there have been difficulties in conducting clinical trials in the paediatric population. So in contrast to the orphan regulation, the orphan designation, which is a voluntary process that a company or in fact a university or academic can apply for, the paediatric obligations are mandatory. And so any company has to abide by the paediatric regulation, regardless of where they're developing their medicine. Another piece of new regulation that came into operation in 2014 but has yet to come into force is the new clinical trial regulation. And this replaced the directive. And the aim of this regulation is to try and create a more harmonized and favorable environment within the European system to conduct clinical trials and improve collaboration, particularly information sharing and work sharing between the different member states. I think of interest particularly, and it's something that we don't have more details on how this will be implemented yet, is the bottom last bullet point in italics, and this is taken directly from the regulation, where it says that clinical trials for the development of orphan medicinal products and of medicinal products to address subjects affected by severe, debilitating, and often life-threatening diseases, affecting no more than 1 in 50,000, ultra rare, should be fostered. So I think this is a really important part of this regulation that recognises the challenges of conducting clinical trials in small populations of patients. And hopefully it will mean that there will be further clinical trials in this particular area. Marketing authorization. Marketing authorization is the term used for gaining a drug license. So it's how a company will seek, when they've got all of the data, they'll seek the marketing authorization from a competent authority, such as the MHRA or the EMEA. There's a number of different types of application procedure, and the procedure depends on the nature of the active ingredient and the proposed market area. A marketing authorization is normally submitted by a pharmaceutical company, but in fact, anyone with the necessary supporting data can also apply. For orphan drugs, so orphan products that have been designated through the European Medicines Agency, it's mandated that they use a process called, or a procedure called, the centralized process marketing authorization. And this allows a marketing authorization through the Committee of Human Medicines, and the approval will result in a marketing authorization in all member states of the EC. There are a number of routes for companies and others to gain access to regulatory expertise. So for example, the MHRA offers scientific advice in face-to-face meetings, and I'll touch on the importance of this when I conclude with a few slides on drug repurposing. We offer broader scope meetings to discuss general approaches to drug development. We have joint meetings with NICE, the HTA body in England, and we offer PIM designation meetings for our early access to medicine scheme. The MHRA's Innovation Office provides a single point of contact for those academics and companies that need help in terms of navigating regulatory processes, particularly areas where there is not mature guidance. Also, there's advice that can be sought from the European Medicines Agency, such as the Innovation Task Force and EMEA scientific advice. As with all areas of science, regulatory science is evolving, and it can be described as a range of scientific disciplines that are applied to the quality, safety, and efficacy assessment of medicinal products that inform regulatory decision-making throughout the life cycle of a medicine. And in the right side panel, you can see that there's a copy of the top copy of the document from the European Medicines Agency, EMEA Regulatory Science to 2025. And this provides an interesting roadmap in terms of where the EMEA thinks that regulatory science will evolve in the coming years. Importantly, one of the areas that has been evolving is the rise of the small population. Years ago, the interest in developing medicines in small populations was very rare. But now, increasingly, there's much interest in developing drugs in the orphan setting, in rare diseases, but also in personalized medicine, because we see many of the issues of conducting clinical studies with small numbers of patients is equally as challenging. An example of this is in the rare cancers, where the common cancers have now been subsetted and split to very rare conditions. Patient centricity is another area which is also really nice to see increasing in regulatory science and regulatory authorities. It's increasingly recognized that the patient is a key partner in drug development, enhancing the understanding of the disease and the treatment impact, and helping to select what is most important and relevant to measure from the patient's perspective. There are increasing opportunities to incorporate rigorous patient-reported outcome data into the regulatory decision-making by including these measures in clinical trials. And last year, we launched a public consultation on how best to engage patients and the public. In a broader project in the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is a joint public-private partnership, the Patients Active in Research and Dialogues for Improvement of Generation of Medicines paradigm is nearly completing its 2-year work on looking at how to provide a unique framework to support effective, meaningful, and sustainable patient engagement and demonstrate the return of the engagement for all players. There are a number of documents that will be published from the Paradigm project, and I think this provides a really important milestone in terms of patient engagement in drug development, and I really look forward to seeing some of these initiatives put into practice. So now I'll just move briefly on to the UK Early Access to Medicine Scheme. A key challenge often confronting regulators and other stakeholders, it can be early patient access. And there may be a fine balance between denying patients potentially useful drugs and approving products for which the drug development may be considered as immature. But it is recognized that with greater needs, it's acceptable to make decisions based on a greater degree of uncertainty in the data. So over 6 years ago, in 2014, the Early Access to Medicine Scheme was launched with an aim to give access to unlicensed medicines and address some of the pressing patient access issues. The scheme is voluntary and it doesn't replace the normal licensing routes or procedures. And it's primarily aimed at medicines that are towards their end of their development program. The company supplies the products free of charge, and the MHRA gives a scientific opinion following a 2-step evaluation process. This slide indicates the 4 criteria that the company must fulfill for a positive benefit risk balance for a scientific opinion. There needs to be a life-threatening or seriously debilitating condition without adequate treatment options, so a high unmet medical need. The medicine should offer promise that it's likely to have benefit significant advantage over existing treatment options. The benefit risk balance should be concluded as being positive, and the applicant, so the manufacturer of the medicine, is able to supply the product and to manufacture it to a consistent quality standard. As I mentioned, EAMS is a 2-step process. So the first step is the Promising Innovative Medicines designation, which is an early indication that the medicine is a candidate for early access and early patient access. With the second step, the EAMS scientific opinion. And this is when the authority, the MHRA, will review all of the quality, safety, and efficacy data, and will describe the benefits and risks of using the medicine to support both the prescriber and the patient to make a decision on using the medicine before the license is approved. And here on the right side panel of the slide, you can see an example of the information that we publish when we issue a scientific opinion. You can see there's a document called Public Assessment Report. This provides an overview of the rationale for why the MHRA has approved the product and a summary of the clinical trial data to support the approval. There's a treatment protocol for patients, which provides patients with more information about using the medicine and the side effects. A protocol for healthcare professionals, which supports the prescriber in using the medicine safely and effectively. A treatment protocol on pharmacovigilance, This is the aspect for monitoring the safety of the product in use. So it's mandated that the company collects safety data from the patients that are using the medicine. And finally, a background information document for NHS medical directors to help them better understand the EAMS process. We don't publish the PIM designations, but some companies choose to publish, and this is an example of a press release from a company that had a PIM designation in Niemann-Pick's disease. You can see that they say they recognized by the MHRA as an innovation was important. It demonstrates the strength of their preliminary clinical data. And both designations, the breakthrough designation in the FDA and the PIM designation in the UK, afford us with enhanced regulatory opportunities. We've published a case study on EAMS, which was a number of years ago, one of the first products to come through the Early Access to Medicine scheme, which was a medicine called pembrolizumab, which is one of the new immuno-oncology drugs for treatment of advanced melanoma. And here there is key that there were lessons learned from both the agency in terms of understanding the processes once the EAMS was implemented, and also recognition from the company about the ability to use EAMS as a vehicle for early access. EAMS is not just about new and innovative drugs, but also it can be about innovation in repurposing older drugs. And this is an example of a company that got a PIM designation for an oral formulation of paclitaxel, which is normally an intravenous administrative drug. So the benefit here clearly to patients is that it's an oral formulation, and some of the issues related to the intravenous formulation were removed through the oral route. There's been a number of documents published about EAMS over the last few years, and in particular, the Early Access to Medicine Scheme Independent Review, which was a government review that looked at ways to improve the scheme following launch. And a number of the areas and recommendations from this report have been considered and are being taken forward. And the final slide on EAMS addresses the ability to be able to apply for EAMS. As you can see, this is our web page. So it provides the applicant for EAMS a number of guidance documents. There's an overview, but also it lists all of the EAMS scientific opinions. So all of the scientific opinions that we've given, you'll be able to find these here. However, following feedback from our patient consultative forum and other external colleagues, we're in the process of splitting our EAMS webpage so that we'll have one EAMS webpage which will be dedicated to patients and healthcare professionals, where we can have more relevant material for patients. And we'll have a second webpage which will be dedicated to industry for those that wish to apply for the EAMS scheme. I just wish to touch on one other area in terms of early access, is something called the Accelerated Access Review. This was a government commissioned review, which was launched in November of 2014. And the report made recommendations to make it easier for the NHS patients to access innovative technologies, not only medicines, but also devices and digital. A government response to the report was published with a number of recommendations, trying to really create a strategically important route for transformative medicines and devices and digital to come to patients as quickly as possible in the NHS. One of the outcomes was something, an organisation called, or group called the Accelerated Access Collaborative. This is a unique partnership consisting representatives of the Healthcare Landscape Organisation and industry, and it's chaired by Lord Darzi. And there's a number of ongoing pieces of work evaluating how innovative technologies can be moved into the NHS as timely as possible. So now I'll just conclude with a final few slides on drug purposing, which is becoming a really hot topic in regulatory science. And in fact, many rare diseases are really the trailblazers and leading in the field of drug repurposing. So what does drug repurposing mean? So drug repurposing is the process of looking for a new use for an existing drug. So for an indication, a patient population outside of the scope of the original treatment. The benefits of this are that the drug has been around for a reasonably long period of time. So we understand the safety profile better. It could lead to faster development times and reduced costs. And repurposing now constitutes a really dynamic and innovative field of drug development that can offer real benefit to patients. A piece of work through the European Commission was a group, an expert group called the Safe and Timely Access to Medicinal Products for Patients. It's set up to aid exchange of views between member states and examine initiatives with a further aim to improve safe and timely access to patients. One of the key areas of interest for the STAMP group has been repurposing, and they've generated the components of a framework to support repurposing with scientific advice as the main regulatory tool to support repurposing projects. So scientific advice is the offer from regulatory authorities when a company or sponsor will come to the agency with questions related to their development program. We provide both regulatory and scientific advice. And in this article that was published by the Anti-Cancer Fund, they were really highlighting the importance of not-for-profit and academic organizations coming for scientific advice. It's a very well-established route for pharma, but it's not so well established for the academic and not-for-profit organization. And in this publication, it highlights the importance of coming for advice from regulatory authorities. Advice was described as being extremely enlightening, that it provided focused feedbacks on the level of evidence to propel bisphosphonates and propranolol through to label extension, providing feedback in a number of areas in the development program. Another interesting UK initiative is from the Academy of Medical Research Charities that published a report a couple of years ago, produced in collaboration with a wide range of stakeholders, including the MHRA, NICE, and the Department of Health. And there were a number of recommendations made, and these are currently ongoing discussions. So in summary, drug regulation affects all aspects of pharmaceutical development. And regulatory authorities have really diverse roles, seeing cutting-edge developments. I think regulators are becoming much more proactive than reactive to changing science. And the nature of the work is really academic and applied, but really is essential for protecting public health. There's increasing interest in early drug approvals, more patient centricity in the drug development, but also in the regulatory approval pathway, and also interest in terms of driving more efficiency in development strategies. Precision medicine is transforming the development of medicinal products, and clinical development programs are changing with fewer patient numbers available for the efficacy and safety analysis. And I think another big change on the horizon is the inclusion of more real-world data sources in the work that we do for approval. So I'd like to thank you for your time, and I'm very happy to take any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. O'Connell. I'm going to use my screen save just so that at least my signal keeps going. And the first question that came up very quickly is, how much do you think Brexit will affect how drugs are approved in the UK?
Yeah, so the UK is currently still in the transition period following the exit from the EU at the beginning of this year. We're currently developing a number of different pathways to support licensing following exit in January of 2021. Some of those pathways will be aligned with approval of medicines that come out of the European Medicines Agency, so the Committee for Human Medicinal Products. But in addition, we're also working on some exciting innovative licensing proposals for the UK as a standalone authority. And we hope to publish more information on those proposals towards the end of the summer.
Right, and I must admit, I did notice the one about the accelerated review, which is always very fascinating. So I assume a lot of this is going to probably be more put into place as you start to position yourself what happens in 2021, isn't it? Because at the moment it's preliminary. One question is, does SMA fall under an orphan category?
Yes, it does. And actually, if you go to the European Medicines, either the European Medicines Agency webpage or the European Commission's webpage on orphan drugs, you can see all of the products that have been approved for orphan designation and SMA. And I think, if memory serves correct, there's between 10 and 12 different products that are designated in the SMA disease category.
And then an attached question is, there's a few that came in. So does the way you regulate medicines change if there's more trial data, say, based on a pediatric population or a very small population, as opposed to your classic adult through to child?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think what we're seeing is that we're seeing less data overall because of the interest in rare diseases, but also because of the interest in personalized medicine. So we recognize fully that in rare diseases or in pediatric populations, it's not possible to generate exactly the same data that you might in a larger population. So that means that it may not be possible to conduct what might be classed as a gold standard, such as the randomized control trial. It might only be possible to collect evidence from a single arm study, so a study where all patients are put on one particular drug. And the additional data may be collected in the post-authorization setting. So absolutely, we take into consideration the patient population, the feasibility of conducting the development program in the particular population of patients, and what the landscape is for conducting that research in the UK, but also in Europe and across the globe.
And in that, I think also that came up with the slide on paradigm. We have one where, how are we as patients best to engage with the MHRA? So
yeah, no, that's really exciting. So since we launched our public consultation, we've been working on a new patient engagement strategy. And actually, when we're looking at our new innovative licensing routes, the patient is absolutely at the heart of that. So there's going to be specific points along the pathway of drug development for patient engagement. I think we already have a number of really good examples of where we have engaged with patients for specific aspects of the work we do. So for example, we have engaged patients for a benefit risk view, an unmet medical need for one of our EAMS products, which was for treatment of Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. So we had a specific patient ad hoc group to support some of the decision making that we made there. We've also incorporated patient voice in another benefit risk decision in extending an indication for a very well known medicine. But the population was quite different, so we wanted to seek potential patients and actual patients' views with that. So in terms of being able to get involved, I think our strategy is nearly finalized, but currently we have what's called our Patient Consultative Group Forum. And this has over 100 or more different either individual patients or patient groups. And the topics can vary from being introduced to aspects around EAMS, other regulatory aspects, views on a variety of different regulatory and drug development topics. So please get in touch with my email if you want to get more involved, and I can send a link to our colleagues in the patient engagement team.
That sounds very good. And also, is it possible to just explain a little bit about the yellow card system? Because there's a lot more facility now for, say, parents to notify the agency if they have concerns with medicines.
Yeah, sure. It's not my area of expertise because I work in the
Yeah.
pre-licensing, but certainly yellow card has been around for decades, and it's been a fantastic route for patients and the public to report side effects from their medicines. And there's a number of initiatives in terms of trying to make it easier, from an app, from the web pages, and other aspects. But it's not my area of expertise, I'm afraid. I can't really say
No,
much
I think
more
it's
than
just always worth reminding people. Now,
that.
here's here's the classic question: how long does it take for the regulatory process for approval, approximately?
Yeah, so for SMA, most, I would think, all of the majority of the drugs will be orphan designated, which is through the European system currently. So it's fairly variable. So the time frame for a new drug from inception, so from the beginning of the proof of concept work before the medicine goes into patients, right the way through to clinical trials and through to marketing authorization, can take between 5 to 8 years on average. I think that time is reducing. I think there's a number of initiatives, particularly innovative trial design, recognition more of unmet medical needs, different regulatory priorities in terms of looking at accelerated access and accelerated approvals. But currently, from start to finish, I think it's between 5 to 8 years on average for a medicine to come through the pipeline.
Okay, and then,
I'm sorry, I didn't answer the question in terms of
and then
how
the final
regulatory.
bit.
I wasn't trying to.
You scared them.
I wasn't trying to avoid it. So, in actual fact, the regulatory component is a relatively modest component overall from all of the time, from the number of years it takes for approval. In the system with the European Medicines Agency, a new chemical or biological medicine, the timetable is 210 days, but that doesn't include clock stops, which are points within the timetable when questions are asked to the industry applicant, and they have a period of time where they seek answer, they generate answers to the questions from the regulators. But in areas of unmet medical need and products that are given a designation called PRIME, priority medicine, that 210 days is reduced to 150 days. So that's the regulatory timescale for approval of new medicines.
That squeezes it down. This question probably bridges a little bit with NICE, because it goes within the evaluation of medicines. You often see mention of cost benefit, and then how much is involved where there's an assessment of patient quality of life, and how much of that is considered. Probably more from your agency rather than, say, NICE's position, may be the question.
I think both agencies are, increasingly interested in the selection of patient-reported outcome measures. They're seen increasingly as essential in the clinical development program, and when we give scientific advice, it's something that we're able to recommend to companies about using different patient-reported outcomes. These are usually instruments such as questionnaires that can be used to understand better how a patient feels and functions on a medicine. They're incredibly useful to understand around tolerability, so side effect profile, how patients manage on a particular medicine, but they can also be used to understand better the activity of a drug and look at particular symptoms of a condition. So I think we're really moving into a new era of using patient-reported outcomes. The methodology to use patient-reported outcomes has improved immeasurably. So the quality and the robustness of the data that we are now seeing that's coming through clinical trials is increasing. So I think with increased patient engagement, I think patients will be wanting to have these endpoints, these study endpoints within the clinical trials. I think we will see many more patient-reported outcomes coming into the clinical trials, and that should translate into better information when we approve drugs, so that information then can be provided to the patient and the healthcare professional to support those prescribing and administrative decisions.
Thank you. Can you see more involvement of, sort of charities and other groups in this, in sort of helping determine the best way for that to happen?
Yeah, I think it's brilliant at the moment. I think we've seen some amazing changes in terms of charity groups. So, for example, Dushan UK has their own orphan designation for tamoxifen. So they've been to the European Medicines Agency and they've got their own designation. We've done a number in the last year, done a number of regulatory meetings with patient groups that are, generating their own development programs. So they have a product, and this tends to be in drug repurposing because of the accessibility of the medicine. But we're increasingly seeing patient groups actually taking ownership of the clinical development program, and right from the very beginning. And I think another aspect that we've seen that's been led through Europe, through the European Medicines Agency, but I hope it's something that we'll be able to replicate in the UK, is patients coming to scientific advice meetings. So scientific advice meetings are a forum or a framework for interaction between the medicines regulator and the sponsor of a product, someone developing a product through a clinical trial. And increasingly through the Scientific Advice Working Party at the European Medicines Agency are patients that are being included into these discussions. And so they sit with the regulator, with the industry sponsor, and are really able to provide such added value in terms of the feasibility of the study, the acceptability of the endpoints, the issues regarding potential toxicity. So I think we're really at a threshold, and I think the Paradigm initiative is also going to change things because it will provide a really helpful framework for different stakeholders in terms of a consistent approach for patient engagement. So I think in the next couple of years, we're likely to see some big changes in terms of patient engagement, and I think it's incredibly positive.
Good to hear. Now, here's a very topical one for us in the community of SMA. How much do you think other countries' regulatory body decisions on approving drugs affect MHRA's decision, for example, the FDA? So I think you probably worked that one out.
Yeah, so we don't work in isolation, and I think increasingly from next year we're not. There's no intention to work in isolation either. We have strong collaboration with regulatory authorities all over the world, and I still believe that we'll have strong collaboration and friendship with our colleagues in Europe. There are other similar regulatory authorities with similar views and standards, such as Health Canada in Canada, the TGA in Australia, Swissmedic, the Singapore agency, and as you mentioned, also the FDA. And there are a number of initiatives that bring regulators together to discuss particular products, to have workshops together, to evolve regulatory science. So I absolutely see opportunity going forward for the UK to still collaborate with other regulators and to share particular aspects of drug development and drug approvals.
I think this one's linked to the repurposing, because how often does the MHRA approve experimental administration methods for already approved drugs on an MAA?
Currently, very, very rarely. Unfortunately, many of these, for older drugs, many of the innovative pathways for looking at new routes of administration are not developed by industry because there may be a lack of protection or income or revenue to support that change to the formulation. So some of these are conducted by not-for-profit organizations, but there's still a challenge in terms of bringing them on label, because only the marketing authorization holder, so only the holder of the license, the industry partner, is able to change the license package or the extension to the license. But I think the stamp initiative, which is going to start running a pilot in the coming months, might really change things, because there is engagement with FPA, which is the main trade association in Europe, and also Medicines for Europe, which is the main trade association for generic products. And they are part of the work to support the stamp repurposing pilot. And really, I'm hopeful that that pilot, which is focused on what are called champions, which are not-for-profit or academic organizations, will really start to build an interesting framework about how we can move some of these innovative developments of older drugs, whether that's a new formulation or whether it's a new indication, into the licensed arena, by driving interest to industry to take that forward.
Thank you. And actually, reading that question again, I think it may also have had another direction, as in drug A, which is already for one indication, but then drug B and the use of them in combination, because we're starting to see that a little bit in SMA.
Okay, yeah, no, and I think the same issue applies, because if you don't have interest from drug B manufacturer to do the clinical work, even if there might be a strong biological or plausible mechanisms of action, there really needs to be a look at the incentives and the route to being able to facilitate that type of development program, but also the route to gaining a license, which means that the product can be prescribed within the label and it's easier for reimbursement decisions to be made.
Okay, and it's actually stimulated a bit of discussion, the paradigm, and people are interested in how to get involved. And there is one: how can we find out about meetings where patients are able to attend? So that's a question.
Yeah, well, I'm really pleased that people are interested, and Paradigm is great. It's been going for about, I think, 1.5 years, 2 years. And so it's due to end reasonably soon in October, I think, October, December this year. I think the ends of some of the public consultation. My suggestion would be is to go to if you Google IMI Paradigm and patient, it will come up. But if you can't find it, please just drop me a mail and I will send you the link. And there should be some contacts there in terms of some of the public consultations that are still ongoing to finalize some of these consensus documents and framework to support sustainable patient engagement.
Right, thank you for that. And I think there's a tough question here, but I think we all know about this one. In your work, obviously, how much has COVID affected, because obviously as a key agency like your own, you're going to be hit by a lot of the changes affected by COVID-19.
Yeah, I mean, COVID's affected everyone, hasn't it, in terms of work, content of work and work practice and home life and everything. I think there's obviously been challenges, but I think there's also been some really positive learning from COVID, and I'll give a number of examples. So we've used EAMS, so our company has used EAMS as a vehicle for approval of a scientific opinion for remdesivir, which is which is actually currently the only approved medicine to treat COVID patients. And we learned a lot by stripping down the regulatory sort of process for the early access to medicine scheme. Normally have a very standardized timetable. And what we did is that we broke it down into sections. And so we did what we called a rolling review of the data. So as soon as the company had data available, so they already had a lot of their quality data, which is their manufacturing data and non-clinical data, we already assessed that in advance of the clinical data. And normally we would never do that. We would like to see all of the data together. So we streamlined a number of areas, and I think it's really sort of helped sort of our thinking about how we might move and design the scheme and create more flexibility in terms of not just during the COVID pandemic. I mean, obviously we won't be able to change everything. You can't give all your resource all the time for everything. But certainly I think for something like EAMS, we learned some really valuable lessons from COVID about how we can do things differently and expedite patient access, because I think the time from first submission of the data to the grant of the scientific opinion was 28 days, I think. I heard the company say at a presentation recently. And so that's incredibly quick for essentially a new active to look at all of that data. Other positives I think that have come out of COVID have been some of the work that our clinical trial unit has been doing in some of the larger platform-based studies. So some of these novel design studies where you have multiple arms of different treatments. So they've been really, they've been approved really quickly. We're able to give scientific and regulatory advice to sponsors of these studies. And I think a final element that I think has really driven home, we already collaborate quite extensively with colleagues across NICE, for example, the devolved administrations in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, but also NHS colleagues, MHRA. But we've been working much more closely together on horizon scanning, what's coming through the COVID pipeline, looking at some of the data, having joint discussions. So I think it's really helped sort of solidify some thoughts that we already had in terms of, future ways of working. And I think the pandemic has allowed us to put into practice some of the things that we thought we would like to do, and we've actually been able to do them. And just to say that, that all of our other regulatory work, aside from the pandemic, is still ongoing. So we have approved, we're still approving scientific opinions for EAMS during the EAMS pandemic. So all of our other work is still ongoing. That we have we have agreed with industry and others that some of the regulatory requirements can be changed during this particular time.
Great. So that actually answers a question that if it has affected the way you're working. And then there's this all-important one. Are you hopeful in that treatments or vaccines for COVID are going to become available soon? And living not that far from Oxford and knowing King's College is doing so much, it's quite exciting that the UK scientists and clinicians are doing so much for this.
No, I think absolutely. I mean, it's in terms of the research and the volume of research and the speed of the research has really been incredible. And what we've learned in a reasonably short period of time, I'm sure many of those lessons can be applied to other disease areas going forward. As you would know, there are a number of ongoing clinical trials for vaccines. There are a number of products that are quite advanced in terms of their clinical development program. And we already have remdesivir. There was another product called dexamethasone, which is a steroid, which I'm sure SMA families are aware of. And that product was shown, that was included in a UK trial, and that was shown to offer a survival benefit, the first product to demonstrate a survival sort of benefit. So I think it's brought forward the importance of repurposing, looking at the medicines that you've already had. It's brought forward, how to design really efficient, innovative clinical trial designs, how to streamline regulatory approval, how to support engagement between different stakeholders more. So I think there's a number of areas where, even in sort of the last 4 or 5 months of the pandemic, that we've really learned a huge amount and learned how we might put some of those aspects into practice.
And I must admit, listening to the news and other outputs, a lot of the professors, both at Oxford and King's, have said how important it is to be able to go to MHRA because of your cumulative experience. And I know we also have an IBSC, so the biological standards, they have a lot of experience. So it's quite nice that we can pull and share that sort of experience to help the whole of the community. So I think that's a positive note on which to leave. And I do want to thank you very much, Dr. O'Connor, because we very much appreciated this. It's starting to buzz, so I think you'll find there will be a lot more feedback and comments, and we'll probably filter them and share them with you. And
Sure.
we'll find a way of posting that. And I actually for me, I'm announcing the next webinar, and I don't think in my life I'd have expected this, but I'm announcing the next one is with Baroness Tanya Gray Thompson, a great heroine of my life, and she's speaking on activism and equality. So we've been very lucky in who we've had on these webinars, and I thank you very much for taking the time today and providing us so much information that's very useful. So thank you very much.
I've really enjoyed it, and thanks very much for the invitation. I hope it wasn't information overload, because it was quite a lot. But the slides are there really just to provide, feedback. So hopefully it's there.
Yeah, people thought they looked good, so, and it's quite exciting on their Twitterverse. Thanks again, Dan. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.